It's really good to see everybody again. At this time last week, I was enjoying myself in sunny Monterey with my father-in-law, and so he thanks you for letting me be with him. Today we're going to take the more applied approach to Judaism. Last week it was quite an intense, interesting, comprehensive approach, very active, energetic presentation last week. And we think it'll be the same today because we have Rabbi Yitzhak Hankin's husband with us. And Rabbi Yitz, we should probably do the formal part, but he's such a wonderfully creative and warm person that I think I can get away with calling him Rabbi Yitz. We've been friends and colleagues for over 30 years. We worked together back in the 1970s in the areas of developmental disabilities, primarily trying to create alternatives for people with disabilities. And so while we were working together, we would have these long conversations and talk about our different values and what motivates us to do the work we do. And so it wasn't surprising at all to me that during one of our get-togethers he told me, well, guess what? I'm going to be the cantor in Salem. And for those of you who know, my second love in the world is singing. And so to think that you could actually get paid to sing, these wonderful verses, it just seemed like an ideal opportunity. And some of my very close friends are from Salem, and they were really blessed by his presence in their synagogue. And then he continued to move and grow and develop, and became the rabbi here at Temple Beth Israel, and has been in that position for many years, and is really a beloved figure both within his own synagogue, but also within the community in general. So when we thought about this class, that one of the first people I wanted to have present was Rabbi Yitz. So he's here today. I'd like for you to please warmly welcome him, and then we'll get on with the program.
Thank you. And thank you, Dan and Carrie, for coming and meeting with me and inviting me to participate in this exciting course. I was asked to prepare some sharing about the life according to Rabbi Yitz.
Yes.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey, my life journey, and the place of my life within a tradition. And I want to also let you know that I hope you'll have questions and comments and answers and all of those good things, so that we'll have time to really share and explore together. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My grandparents were immigrants to this country. My father came from Russia when he was 12 years old. And my grandparents were, on my father's side, were very religious. My father was not religious. My grandfather was very learned, and probably would have been thrilled if my dad was interested in religion, but my dad was interested in boxing and basketball, and went a different route. So, but my grandparents influenced me greatly, and were my first real teachers. My grandmother on my father's side was a wonderful singer, and my grandfather was a very serious scholarly person. I don't remember conversations with him, but I remember every time he would come over, he would sit with me at the dining room table and teach me how to read Hebrew. and my grandmother would put me on her lap and sing beautiful songs. It was very sweet and connecting. I grew up in a very traditional community in Pittsburgh with, I don't know if you know who Hasidim are, Hasidic teachers, modern Orthodox, and some of the people that are even more devout in their practice and have a real, more of a closed culture among themselves as a community. So I grew up in that context, went to public school, wanted to go to a day school that was religious, but my parents wanted me to be American and not to go that route. So I was inclined to religion, to spiritual practice as a child. My mother reminds me that one of my favorite activities was to do weddings of the other kids in the neighborhood. When I was probably 8 years old, so I married a lot of kids. It's sticking. They're doing well. But I always loved that sense of spirituality, and particularly the music was my invitation, and my deepest invitation was the sacred sound of the cantor chanting the Hebrew. I didn't know what it meant. It actually became more problematic for me when I started learning what it meant, because then I had to really think about it, not just experience the beauty of the chant and the sweetness of the music and that wonderful human urge to express the sacred. I remember being introduced to a sense of awe when I was in that context. I remember going up to the front of the congregation where the scrolls of the Torah are kept. And because I was musical, I had opportunities to lead the service, even parts of it. The cantor taught me how to do that. And I just remember that feeling of going to that space and that it felt different. The air was different there. The sounds were different there. I was different in that special place. And that became a point of reference for me. I was also a kid with an undiagnosed learning disability, so I spent a tremendous amount of time in the principal's office. So, but the principal loved me a lot, and he had a chair near his desk for me. It was my place that I could come and sit. I spent a lot of time there. I'm so thirsty. Is there any possibility of... Thank you. So part of my formative years were made up of this very wonderful religious context, communal context, and in addition to that, my father of blessed memory was schizophrenic, and so he was hospitalized often during my childhood. And when I'd go visit him in the state hospitals, it was very difficult to see what a so-called hospital was back then. I'm not sure how much progress we've made actually in that.
I think very little.
So that was extremely painful and difficult for me to see. I remember as a child going on the bus to the state hospital and going past the manicured, beautiful lawns, and then getting out at the end of the line there. Thank you. That's very hopeful.
Us singers.
seeing where society put the pain, put it out of sight. People that society did not know how to manage. It was too threatening or too painful for people to know how to cope with. So as a society, I started becoming very aware of the corners of the kind of the underlayer of our social reality. And really, I think that the sense of seeing the brokenness of the world, because it wasn't about my father's illness, it was about how society dealt with mental illness. And then I saw it as how society dealt with old age, how society dealt with disabilities, or how society dealt with people that do criminal behaviors. There's a common pattern there that we hide it away and don't want to know about it. Really don't want to know about it. So that combination of an experience of reaching for the transcendent through music and through prayer and through spiritual practice, in contrast with this other dimension that was so present with a growing awareness of the brokenness of society, really laid the foundation for my sense of the urgency of being responsive, responsible for social conditions, and also cultivating a faith and a strength that we have the capacity to change, that we are here to transform the brokenness. So, you know, when I review the stages of my life and watch its development, I really see that fundamental pattern, really laying the form for me to grow within. When I was old enough to have, when my voice changed, after I was 13 or 14.
You started early.
I was a singer as a little kid. I remember being in the choir with all these elderly big men, and I was this little squeaky soprano.
I was a soprano till I was a freshman in high school.
Hey, let's do some duets.
I've always thought that I wanted to get the deepest voice I possibly could, but it never worked.
So when my voice changed, religion became less interesting to me, because my main passion was around the singing. And I started to play the cello and studied with a Jewish teacher who played in the Pittsburgh Symphony, great guy, very ethical, incredible ethics, not religious at all. And I learned that there was another way of being Jewish that was pretty interesting to me. He was such a good human being that he knew that my family was quite poor and that I couldn't really afford cello lessons. So he would do a trade with me. Here's this professional cellist in the Pittsburgh Symphony who I would babysit or paint the house or mow the lawn, and he would give me the same amount of hours in cello lessons. Wow. I mean, this was unbelievable. So I spent a lot of time there in his home, learning and babysitting and painting and doing all that good stuff, but also expanding my sense of what it meant to be a really fine human being, an ethical human being. He had that kind of relationship, of real mentoring with many students. And I remember me asking once about how he decided to be a cellist, a musician, And I remember his response was, you know, the world is very chaotic and painful, and there's a lot of ugliness in the world. But from here to here, he pointed to the fingerboard on his cello, I can make something beautiful. It was magnificent, you know, that you take. So he just wanted to thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much. So, so that taught me a lot about the difference between ritual Judaism and the ethics of, because he was very much a Jewish guy in his identity, and saw himself as living his Judaism, which was not religious. And one of the big challenges, I think, is that people tend to think, many Jewish people tend to think of there's religious Judaism and then there's secular Judaism. It ain't so. There's a worldview that's cultivated in certain fundamental principles. Some people find ritual to be very useful, to awaken them to sensitivity, to awaken them to a sense of the transcendent. And but if a person is doing all the rituals and then turning around and being nasty to the next the next person, that's not Jewish religion. That's not it. You can do all the rituals in the world. If you're not a decent human being with other human beings, you're not religious, or you're maybe preoccupied with ritual, but that's it. Hopefully you're growing because the rituals, maybe you're cultivating some sensitivity so that you eventually become a kind, compassionate human being. Another Jewish person could have no interest in rituals at all, think that it's superstitious and silly and, you know, who knows what they think, find no use for it, but could be the most righteous person in the world because they have a sense of the sacredness of the lives around them and are caring for their own life as well as the lives of other people. They're looking to see the goodness in humanity and in the world and cultivating that. So that separation, that it's a false separation, that, and maybe because we've so often been in cultures where religion was something that was in the vessel of a church or, you know, in some religious institution, that perhaps the Jewish people, I kind of think of it as like a Native American connection there, where there's a whole world view. And you can't separate the day-to-day moments from a sense of a Jewish spirituality. So that was an important lesson to learn, and I really thank that wonderful teacher. All this while, I'd been growing up in pretty much a Jewish neighborhood in Pittsburgh. It was like, you know, for the Jewish high holidays, basically the school was closed because there were maybe a couple kids in this class that weren't Jewish. So I grew up in a very insular neighborhood where Jewish identity was just kind of the basic given in that neighborhood. And there were many in Pittsburgh. There are lots of specific ethnic neighborhoods. It's a very beautiful city. In the terrain of the city itself allows for some real ethnic neighborhoods that have been important to different subcultures. And so, when the '60s rolled around, remember the '60s?
I do.
Anybody else remember the '60s? You saw the movie. So the '60s was a very significant time for consciousness change. The assumptions about what life was going to be and the limits, and people were really wanting to push the limits and understand new possibilities. And for me, one of the very important parts of that was that I lived in an urban commune with people from many different parts of the city, every part of the city, every background in the community, and it was phenomenal because we were discovering a richness in each other's backgrounds, and sharing values that were ethical values. We were all very involved in civil rights, involved in anti-war, and I was living in that commune. There were a couple of other people that were conscientious objectors, and I started to work at that time where they were working in a rehabilitation center for children in Pittsburgh. Back then it was called the Home for Crippled Children. Dan has worked for years to change that kind of language and has succeeded greatly. But back then, that was the term. And I had the good fortune to work with little children who taught me so much. And it was very threatening to me because I was, in a sense, facing some of the fear that the whole society faces when you go into the institutions, because the kids with cerebral palsy, spina bifida, thalidomide babies, serious autism, and they were living there in this home, this institution. And the first time I went there, I was actually pretty freaked out. I felt pretty overwhelmed. I remember going home and feeling like, wow, this is too much.
Did it remind you of the experiences you had with your father? Or were they different?
I think that they were different in that this was such unfamiliar territory to me in terms of the content, in terms of the drive to be there was related to wanting to go to the places that are the corners. In fact, this institution still thrives today, and it's a fantastic rehabilitation center. So it wasn't a dreary, dead-end place. It was a true, fabulous level of rehabilitation going on there. And I felt at the end of my days there that my day counted for something. It wasn't abstract. It was real. Helping a child with a meal, helping a child go to the bathroom, washing, getting dressed, communicating about what they wanted by using what was back then called a rebus board. Sure. You know, these boards where you'd point to every letter very laboriously for a child with cerebral palsy that could hardly, you know, to see the victory of spelling out apple or water and getting it and sharing water, let's go, you know, and the joy of that, the way the eyes would light up, and it was so tremendously meaningful. And those were deeply spiritual experiences for me. There are many times when I think about that stage of my life, because I was in my early 20s then, and think, you know, I'm a rabbi, and it's a wonderful honor and incredible job to have, life work to have. But there are days when I think about some of these kids and some of the exchanges with those children, and I felt like that day was really a great day in life of value. And I question how many phone calls I could make that would make up for helping a kid do the basics. So, I moved out to Oregon, started studying cello at the university here, and stayed involved in activism and with disability rights as a human rights issue. That's when I had the pleasure of meeting Dan and being on different committees in the, developmental disability committees and independent living homes, and I organized a program called Community Bound for young disabled people they were in geriatric nursing homes, and the idea was to help them to live more independently, to come out into the community, into their own apartments, and have services that would support that. At that point, I was reconnecting with my need for spiritual Judaism. There was a big, important part of my life that was wanting attention. And as it turned out, the dean of the music school when I was studying here was a very spiritual man, Robert Trotter, of blessed memory.
Yeah.
He was a dear, dear mentor. And he encouraged me to get back into my Jewish music. He just saw that, yeah, the cello was nice, but there's something else that wants expression. And he encouraged me to get back to that. And that's what set me back on that path to studying to be a cantor, and take the exams and then start working professionally in congregations in that way. At the same time as doing that work, which I felt was really I always think of doing music as my own self-indulgence almost, It feels good to do music, and but I was also doing like half-time that and half-time the work with disabilities and working in homes with individual young people that were quadriplegic in particular. And starting more and more to see the need for a synthesis of spirituality and service and activism. It started to make sense to me that these different strands that really were such basic drives in life fit together in a way that I hadn't understood. I thought it was you did this or this, instead of there's some wholeness that's part of the seed of what this human being wanted to allow to grow. And the spirituality and as I studied more deeply into Judaism, finding so much that really demands a life of being committed to transformation. That there's a basic idea called tikkun olam, which means the repair of the world. That's the job description. That's it. That's the job description for Judaism, to be involved in tikkun olam. And the more I would study my religion, my traditions, the texts, I saw that there's something about not only the Jewish religion, but the human role in creation, as I understood it, in the Torah, referred to often as the 5 books of Moses. The job description given to humanity is to tend and to till the garden. We're here as the caretakers of the earth. And the more I learned, the more it affirmed something so deep inside, some deep intuition about life purpose, a sense of purpose in life. There are some fundamental principles in Judaism that the central teaching of our faith is that there's a oneness. We say, Shema Yisrael, hear Israel, the eternal is one, that there's a unity in creation. And we seek that to discover that unity. That it's a unity that's often hidden under the facade of the brokenness, but that's really there to be transformed, to discover the unity. And so, with people of the relationship of Judaism to other religions is that from a Jewish perspective, there's not an expectation that other people will become Jewish as part of the process to healing the world. The urging of Judaism is that the Jewish people should learn how to be good Jews, that Christians should learn how to be good Christians, that Buddhists should be beautiful Buddhists, that you can be righteous from all of these different paths. And that in a sense, more and more I understand it, and my teacher taught me that in a sense there's a global organism of humanity and beyond humanity. We're all DNA, all of life. There's my dear cousin the fruit fly is not so far away from me in the genome system. And the more I can cultivate that knowing of connected to bigger life than my own, the more I discover that unity principle that's the core of Jewish belief. The more I can see the complementary nature of Christianity with Judaism, the bigger my world gets. The more I can appreciate the mindfulness meditations of Buddhism, the bigger my world gets, because it's seeing that there's so many contributions to the global potluck of spirit, that there's so much that comes to the table from all of these different traditions. And sadly, there's been a triumphalism in religious life that I'm right, you're wrong, kind of. If I'm right, you're wrong. If you're right, then I'm wrong. So therefore, you got to be wrong because I can't be wrong. I've got to be right. And sadly, we think about the power of religion in this world and its history, and how much destruction has happened in the name and continues to happen in the name of the mystery of life, God. And it's tragic. It's unbelievably tragic. We haven't learned yet how to be human to our potential. We're very reptilian. We're not so much mammals yet. So the idea in Judaism, that as I understand it, and as my teachers and colleagues, many of them understand it, is that we're evolving. That life isn't static, that we don't endlessly repeat the same stuff, but we're here with a great capacity to learn, to adapt, to have new insights, to reframe, to see new possibilities. There's a well-known passage, they'll beat their swords into plowshares. So what does that mean, really? Is that just some fantasy ideal out there, or is that really saying that there's an imperative for us to learn how to transform a military-industrial economy into an economy that's based on service and education and health and all of the things that humanity really needs, rather than the destruction that happens with all of the resource that we pour into it? Do we have that capacity to cross that threshold of consciousness where we stop seeing each other as the enemy, but rather a complementary puzzle piece, something that we're placed here to discover in a loving way? So that discovery of the unity of life, of creation, is really the essence of the Jewish teachings, and the sense of being transformative, that we come into the world, and hopefully we've used our energy in a way that we've done some repair on the way and perpetuated the teachings to pass those forward so that the next generation will also pick up and stay in that continuity of a sense of long-range purpose until we get to a place where truly we learn how to live in peace and with justice, and that we learn how to live with nature in a way that we're the caretakers and not the exploiters. We're so, we have a lot to learn.
May I interrupt?
Please, thank you.
Totally ties into what you were just saying. So how is it to, uphold something so sacred when there's so many different perspectives of Judaism? Like earlier you said, he was living his Judaism, and I'm assuming you were saying there's a lot of different ways to live Judaism.
For every Jewish person, there's a different Judaism.
So how is it to be a rabbi and be, I don't completely understand your role, but giving advice, giving spiritual guidance to people who interpret this one religion as so many different religions in a way?
Great question. Well, I think to extend that, how do I live in a world, or how do we live in a world where there's so much variety, and say that this is true and this is true, and it's different? That it would not be a very beautiful reality to think of everybody in my community holding the same belief. I mean, what would we talk about at lunch? Really, what would the challenge be? The idea is to search for what are the underlying principles that unify us, and to as much as we can discover that and find places of commitment that we can share. And yeah, I could talk about how this guy doesn't eat the right kind of chicken. I could busy my life with that kind of stuff forever. Okay. To me, I would not like myself very much at the end of the day, if that's what I was busy doing, rather than, okay, what do we care about together, and how can we put our energy together? Like in our congregation, we built a new building a couple of years ago. We finally, after 10 years of discussions, it was quite a process, I'll tell you. A lot of these gray hair came right out of that new building process. And where we started, what we got to at some point was that we had to stop the preoccupation with the building and get more in touch with what are the values that we want to express, that we hold as common high priority values. So we came to the place after much discussion and debate and different opinions all over the place that sustainability was going to be a key factor, that you can't build a building today as a religious institution in the name of all these transcendent values that is totally another scar on the earth, but to try to build it in a way that honors that value. So sustainability became a clearly articulated value. Accessibility, we were going to go past ADA requirements because we want to express that as a value. So those are the kind, we had a lot of discussion, and then other things fit in when we got agreement about what we were really doing. What we were really doing was expressing some values. We weren't building just a building. We were expressing our commitments together. That became very exhilarating. So everybody had a different sense of how to be Jewish, but we had enough common agreement about key values that we could do something that people really brought their hearts to in a very beautiful way, volunteered all kinds of energy and expertise to have it happen. So it was very inspiring. It was very inspiring. Yes?
Yeah, from what I heard from you that I think was interesting, I've heard some rabbis, and I had a rabbi friend in Michigan, but what I hear from you is very interesting. When you touch the point of rituals, when you said that we may be, someone may be bragging about how he keeps the rituals and so forth, but if you turn around and you are not kind to humanity and you are not doing act of compassion to humanity, those rituals are not as important as the person thinks. That's very important, because I see that there's a relationship with that to other religions, where there may be things in a society and a community that are very important, but people hold on to rituals and religion instead of reaching out and help. I thought that was very critical. So what is the place of that compassion and generosity as in Judaism?
So, the rabbis look at the Torah. The Torah is that's where we begin, with our sacred text. And the Torah, according to rabbinic tradition, the heart of the Torah is these words, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. It's the heart. So if somebody is really practicing the highest form, of Judaism. They're practicing loving their neighbor as their self, feeling a unity, feeling that you are like me. We're not really separate. We're part of life. We're part of creation together. And our discovery is that of that connection. It doesn't say, you know, all these details that are ritual, and I have nothing against ritual I enjoy ritual practice if it cultivates something, a quality inside that I respect. But I don't want ritual to become the object of my adoration. You know, it's much more to remember that loving your neighbor as yourself. In the Torah, there's the teaching, we were slaves in Egypt. And so that what comes up 36 times in some form in the Torah is a statement that you were slaves in Egypt, therefore you know the heart of a stranger, be kind to the stranger. Love the stranger, for you were strangers. Over and over again it comes up that if we suffer, find meaning in the suffering. Find meaning in the suffering and do something good with it. Learn to be compassionate. So that's a very, really deep, important lesson that it's not so obvious because it's not packaged in a ritual. It's just how you look at the world, how we see people, how we respond to what's going on the street when we're walking down the street. That's where we're living. And to be walking in the presence of the divine on the street, in our family conversations, that's where we really live it out. And it's wonderful to elevate times with, you know, a sacredness and activities as sacred. But our task in Judaism is to elevate the world and to bring into our consciousness and into our shared reality a sensitivity that we're in the presence of something very sacred, life. And so it's very difficult when one person tells another person how to be this or how to be the right kind of Jewish person or the right, you know, what's the right way. Everybody's searching. And I assume that that's true for other faiths also, that we're, you know, ultimately we're trying to discover some deep essence of our life. Where's our life coming from? What's its purpose? Thanks for asking those questions. Appreciate it.
I'm really curious. So this fundamental verse from the Torah, you know, love your neighbor as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that gets translated as an active principle of knowing your neighbor, knowing yourself, caring for your neighbor. And so there seems to be a direct extension of compassion, caring, etc. Are those principles that say the youngest Jewish children learn those things as they're growing up, and how does that work?
So first, I want to make it not so pure and simple.
Oh, okay.
I mean, this is, you know, that there are many different interpretations of how to read different texts.
Okay.
I'm reading it in a way that many other people read it, and I will stand by that reading. Some people will say, well, love your neighbor as yourself, but who's your neighbor? Is it just the other Jewish people? Or is it just the other people that believe in monotheism? Is it just the people that are this, or is it just the people, who's your neighbor? So it doesn't get so, as soon as humanity gets a hold of a great teaching, we can mess it up pretty quick. We have to keep challenging ourselves to say, okay, well, how big do I want my world to be? how much do I want to find unity in this world? How much do I believe that we're really, DNA is, we're it, we're life, and together.
Well, let's stop for just a second and get people, small groups and ask that question, discuss that question. Who is your neighbor? Yeah. And let's just focus on that for a couple minutes and get a sense of how that feels with each other. So why don't we get into our normal little small groups and talk about that principle of who is your neighbor? What kind of consensus have we come up with? Are there any consensus positions of who is your neighbor?
We have a few different backgrounds here. Our thought was that, a lot of people like to choose who the neighbor is, but if they can, and from a Christian's perspective, continue reading, you're going to see that it's everyone. And that everyone is your neighbor. And
okay.
That's it.
Thank you.
That's our consensus, is that everyone is.
Anyone else have a thought about that?
I mean, kind of similar, just this idea of oneness. I was raised Sikh, and it's very, very similar that, there is this beauty and this energy in every single person, and it's all this greater, we are all connected. And I love the idea of, love yourself, love your neighbor, because my neighbor is me and I am that person. So it's a really beautiful recurring topic that continues to come up in this class.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to add something actually that Sion had said, is that God created us in his image, and if we're to truly love God, we're to truly love everyone. And so that's where I think sometimes religion gets its bad name, is when people start to try to pick and choose and let pride and their own power seek into ways of trying to make their own belief not biblical. If that makes sense. Kind of lost there.
Anyone else?
No.
Okay. Jordan?
I just also think that the idea of a neighbor isn't really limited to human beings, but also like the environment and animals, the ocean and the trees and all of that fit together.
Okay. Beautiful. Yes, beautiful.
Yeah, I also thought about the neighbor that is also, we often want to help those who are in the street, but we know our own family members and cousins and nephews.
I missed the word you said.
I said that by perspective of seeing a neighbor, start with your own family and extended family. Because before you can reach out and helping humanity, did you love enough your extended family when there are people who are suffering, people who are in misery? I've seen people who want to go in Africa and help when their own family is in really, really deep need. And you ask that people have served those before you can even reach out to help others who are suffering. That was sort of my perspective of seeing that.
Can I respond to that before other? I don't want to stop this, but I do want to respond to that.
Please.
And I can, that when love your neighbor as yourself, it says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, v'ahavta, and you will love your neighbor as yourself. And the way we love ourselves will be the way we love our neighbor is another way of hearing that. If we see the sacred, that we're in an image of God, if we experience the sacredness of our own life, we're much more likely to see that in our neighbor and let that circle grow. And if we think we're nothing, if we think we're just nothing, we'll treat ourselves and others that way. So
like, he mentioned that, we're made up in his her image. Is it the same for Judaism?
absolutely. Well, the passage that you're talking about is in Genesis.
Yeah.
It's in the Torah. That we're created. B'Tselem Elohim is the Hebrew. It's it was a reflection of God, or an image of God. Every human being was created in the image of God, as a reflection of God. Every human being. And I'm with you.
I think a big thing too is how do we reconcile holding the faith that there is a piece of the divine in everyone when what that person may exhibit is evil or corruption or hardship. And what I'm thinking is, I completely resonate with love thy neighbor as yourself, and how to cultivate a deeper sense of faith or affirmation in that when it goes sour, which inevitably it will, right? Like, I have a meal, I share it with you, and you end up robbing from me. Like, how do I still hold that love when that happens?
There are lots of good stories about that. That ultimately, if we truly believe that everyone is the image of God, that doesn't mean that we're all pure and we're all doing our best. We understand that we have inclinations to do good and inclinations to do less than good. And if we relate to each other in a way where we see the good and affirm that in each other and cultivate that, then I think we lift each other up. If we're always looking at the downside, you're garbage, throw these people away because of this or that, and we stop looking for the image of God. I mean, that's our responsibility to keep looking. Their responsibility is to look too, inside. But ours hopefully is not to give up on them, because we're giving up on life. We're giving up, we're saying the unity can't be unified, that we won't come to that place. And not that, some things are ideals, and we probably won't get to see them in our lifetime. And the Talmud, our body of teachings and law, says that it's not for us to complete the task. It's not for you to complete the task, but neither are you free from your responsibility. And so to work as hard as we can, in the most devoted way that we can do it, to elevate the world and to elevate our consciousness in our lives, our actions, our feelings, our thoughts. But to not think that we're going to get to be there for the grand curtain call and ta-da, we did it, yay for us. It might be many generations. So that's one of the beauties about passing a tradition forward, is that consciousness gets preserved, and we say to our children, learn about freedom. When we have the Passover Seder, we talk not only about the liberation from 3,500 years ago, but what's today? Where's oppression happening today? In our own lives, where am I being an oppressor? Where am I being oppressed? All of those quite hard stuff. And I love talking with my kids about that. They used to listen to me. Long time ago. Now they come and they conduct the Seder, and I sit there and I feel proud. Once in a while I get to say something.
Well, I was kind of I'm listening, and my ignorance is greater than myself. I could tell you I'm looking for religion, but you're talking about general stuff. I think I relate to what you're saying about what Judaism was about. But why are we so divided? Why I feel that religion is a big issue in every society around the world? Why is it that if a religion is about love, compassion, and tolerance and all this stuff, why are we so hard on each other and we're dedicated each other to make words about religion? It broke my heart one time because I went to I have friends from Saudi Arabia, and then we were sitting at a table, and this guy comes and out of nowhere, he started addressing them, and it's like, where are you from? I was like, Saudi Arabia, and he was from Israel. But then he started bringing up religion in a way that he was looking for some type of debate. and it kind of turned into a really it kind of turned into a really bad experience, for my opinion, because I have no clue like anything about what's different and stuff. But can you answer that question? Why religion is so? If they're all like one thing, why?
Oh, it's a good question. It's a good question, and I would love to hear what everybody in this room says about that, actually. I'll give my best attempt. We tend to see ourselves as separate beings in competition with each other. Human beings in general, like fight or flight, basic, fear, and then in a group level, groups tend to think my group is right, your group threatened by another group. It's a very primitive kind of mindset that I think that more and more, this is the big lesson we have to learn, because religion is abused in a horrible way. It's used as one of the most oppressive tools in human history. I don't know if it's done more good than harm. I really don't know. But it's here, and it feels like we need to learn how to use it right. To remember what the important, true essence is. Love your neighbor as yourself, not the nonsense is my way is right and your way is wrong. I'm more than you, I'm better than you. It's crazy. It's like it doesn't take us anywhere good. So it's our task to learn how to manage religion in a way that it really does what we say it's here to do, to teach us love and compassion. And we know when we're being loving and compassionate. We feel it inside. But sometimes we get so caught in our ideologies, our ideas that I'm better than this or that we shape our heart around that and not listen to what we truly know is that we're all in the image of God. So I hope that religion can become more and more useful. I think it has a great potential as a wonderful teaching and wisdom source and elevating consciousness. It has that potential. But we'll always be falling short if we're standing on each other's head rather than side by side.
Okay, because you mentioned something that kind of I relate a lot to, is that religion can be very oppressive, and I think that was one of the main issues that why I came away from religion, because it was just oppressive, and I see things that I was not agreeing with, and I was raised in a very religious house. Like I was, till this point, I'm still subjected to a lot of sermons from my family about why I don't go to church and why I don't go to confession and stuff like that. But and then I start thinking about where is my spirituality at? It's important. I think to me it's important, but I refuse to follow or say, I'm this, because like I said, every religion is pretty much everything is the same. The core values are the same thing. I believe there's a God, yeah, I believe there's a God, but who's a God, that's really not important to me. I think it's what it is treat everybody equally and with respect and love and compassion. And that's why I was like, I'm trying to figure out, exactly where I fit and things like this. So that's why, and that experience was horrible to me, because I was like, this is just ridiculous for someone to be subjected to this because of what religion you follow. That's not okay.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it is, but you're right.
But I see so much good. There's so many good teachings, also in the religions. If we really listen to them deeply and not out of self-interest, but out of interest of something higher purpose. I think that's a different. If I'm using religion to make myself and my thinking above everybody else, rather than this is my search for truth. What's your search for truth? Maybe we could share something and discover that, maybe we both see something new as a result of talking. And I don't have to be right. I can be listening.
I think I did love what Dr. Dan thought about pluralism. I speak French. Pluralism in French, yeah.
Yeah.
So, he spoke about how there's engagement and dialogue of different religions that in communities they can come not to conquer each other or to convince each other, but to respect each other's culture and try to understand each other. And I thought that was very important. If we are willing to speak on that a little bit.
Sure. Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
our
sure.
whole basis of our ecumenical interfaith dialogue is based on the pluralistic concept. And Rabbi Yitzhak has been a leader in promoting that dialogue and sharing his faith and listening to other faiths. And I think what it is that by sharing your faith and learning about other people's faith from a real human and personal relationship perspective, what it does is it strengthens your resolve to be more loving, to be more engaged, to be in relationship, and that it fosters that the breaking down of those barriers, so that the kinds of issues that Pedro would be talking about, we know they exist in the world, we know the divisions exist, but as your language of what are our common features, what are our common principles? We have such common ancestry, genetics, belief systems. We've heard it today, love thy neighbor as thyself comes out of Genesis, or the image of God comes out of Genesis, excuse me. Yeah. And so if we do sincerely love ourselves and love our neighbors, then it's incumbent upon us to seek the transformation that Yitzhak talks about. The transformation which is to get beyond our selfish, petty, who's up, who's down notions, and then go to this true loving transformation. And I think that loving transformation is what the sacred texts all teach us and allow us to focus on the good, not that we completely ignore the brokenness of the world, because the brokenness of the world gives us the impetus to heal, to care, to be more compassionate, to be more loving. So that's what I hear in when I listen to Yitz talk about his faith tradition, and when he listens to mine, and we all share these things, we realize
it's so rich.
We have so much in common.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
It's like so beautiful not to walk around feeling like my world will be encroached upon by my friend here if he tells me what he believes. What do you believe, man? Far out. Wow, yeah. That's the way you see it.
And
yeah.
I liken it. I remember the day I went to your house and it was in the dead of winter. It was really icy. Do you remember that? And we were kind of sliding up to the front door. It was ice all over the place, and it was kind of a shady little spot where you were living at that time. And it was my memory of it was like the first night in college, meeting your roommate and sitting up all night and sharing what your life was like, and just meeting a new person. And the richness of pluralism is that it's relationship building. And but it's on a topic that we've historically been told, don't talk about it. Right. Don't talk about politics. Don't talk about religion.
The first idea is probably a good idea. No. Sorry, I'm just not that high yet.
But the idea is again that maybe we do eliminate the first one, but
you're gutsy. That's all.
Yeah. So that's the beauty of it.
Mm-hmm. That's the reason why I asked you that question based on what he was asking about the people that he has from Saudi Arabia. We have in a diversity class in FHS a speaker, Muslim, who has he owns some few restaurants, Cafe
Zeno?
Zenon,
Yeah.
Abraham.
We really, he
Yeah, he'll
spoke
be
a
here
good,
in about 3
beautiful
weeks.
story. He spoke a beautiful story of how him and one rabbi here, who was already dead,
Rabbi Myron
yes,
Kimberg
they
is
became
listening.
so close friends that he's from Palestine, and
Yes.
he was invited to make some meal to his like rabbi son wedding or whatever. He said, I couldn't believe it that here we are the people who usually people are seen like they are fighting all the time, but we came together and he said, I can't believe I'm serving the rabbi son meal and so forth and so on.
Yeah, I think
So I feel like depends on how many people are willing to engage and so I thought that was a beautiful story.
I do too.
Yeah, that was.
There's, when we think about where we are in the world and where we're wanting to get to, one of the visions that we see in our prophetic writing is the statement about God's house. My house will be a house of prayer for all people. My house of prayer will be a house of prayer for all people. So I don't know if that's going to be a building or if we're going to understand that the whole world is God's house of prayer if we're prayerful in it for all people. For all people. And we're not there yet. We're just not there. But what can you do? This is where we inherited the world. And we can say, okay, we'll just go around and around on this globe. We'll live and we'll take it the way we received it, and that's just the way it is. Or we'll think that, wait, maybe we can grow. Maybe we can contribute something, take us to a new level of understanding, and work for that. Understand that we're in this life together, that we're growing. Life grows. Consciousness grows. So that's the challenge. How far can we take it toward the vision that we hope that we're working toward?
Hold on.
On that note, I greatly appreciated everything that you've shared with us today and the discussion that you've ignited. And I think that I would like to hear, sort of as a personal perspective from you, what it is that you do as a leader and as a member of this community to continue spreading this love and continue spreading this mindset. And clearly you're a role model and behave in a way and accept those in a way that shares that without even having to talk about it. But in sharing with others or in teaching, what tools do you use? How do you continue that?
Thank you for asking. When you ask me that, I feel like a failure. Quite honestly, when I think about what I. No, I know. it's my instinct. Thinking, oh my God, what I'd like to be giving, and how close am I to that? But I can tell you that I take these beliefs seriously. I believe them. I really believe that we're capable of doing this amazing thing with life. I believe that so deeply. And so I try to remember for myself to have an experience of awe, to live with a sense of the miraculous nature of life as a beginning, to really witness how awesome this creation is that we're a part of. And so I feel awakened to a bigger life than my own by doing that. I feel connected to a very big sense of life. And I'm seeking to find the unity with people. And in practical terms, like I can give you an example of a project that I've been involved in for decades now, off and on. And it's a project I do on the side because I can't spend very much time. As a congregational rabbi, there's pastoral stuff and teaching classes and all kinds of stuff that you do. Board meetings, all kinds of stuff, But as part of my way of looking at our tradition as an inheritance that we're to work with, I've been working with a network of rabbis on what's called ethical kashrut. You know what kosher is? We tend to think of kosher foods as, it's in the Torah, it says you can eat these things and you can't eat these things. And so kosher literally means fit for usage, something that's proper to use. So there are other, that tradition has been very narrowly applied to, primarily to foods, like what can I eat, what can I not. The kosher, you know, you can have, this can be a kosher garment if it wasn't made by child labor in in a sweatshop. It's not kosher if it was. By Torah, you can't benefit from exploited work. But that's part of that secret, hidden reality, like where the mental hospitals and the prisons and the nursing homes, and so the sweatshops are also part of that world that we don't want to look at. So to take principles like environmental impact, the humane treatment of animals, and worker justice as criteria that have to be included in what's kosher, what's fit for use. And so one of the things I'm really interested in is developing screening mechanisms to say that this is kosher, it's fit for use because it passes those screens. What I'd really love to see is friends from other traditions doing the same, working together on a global ethic. Because that's what we look at the world and we say, there are people that are being enslaved right now, and we're paying for it. I buy chocolate, if I'm not careful about what chocolate I buy, I am exploiting a slave. So if I can't even know, because the corporations are just covering that stuff up, they do the best to keep it kind of out of the view. If I say, I can't practice my religion unless I know where that chocolate comes from. I can't unless I know where that shirt or that soccer ball, that carpet. Then my religion will be transformative. And I think that there's tremendous potential for that being a shared interfaith work, because I know that Muslims and Christians, we all share the same sensitivity about those things. And that's common ground. And so maybe after I'm a congregational rabbi, I'll get to do more focus on that. But I've taught about that in conferences and written about that and do networking about it. And thanks for asking me about this, because you're re-inspiring me about, hey, wait, what am I doing here? Thanks.
Part of the lecture that I'm going to provide for the second half of the class has to do with the role that service plays in our lives, and the role that's played by the person who is being served in addition to the server. And we in Family and Human Services think of ourselves as the servers. And many religious traditions talk about the important role that the person who's being served plays in this relationship. And I wanted Yitz to just comment on that for a second, if he possibly could.
So there's a story about King Solomon. The King Solomon wore a ring that said on it, "This too shall pass." So if he was at the height of his joy, he would look at it and say, "This too shall pass." If he was at the lowest point in his suffering, "This too shall pass." A recognition of how our place shifts, that we're in control of something in this world, in our life, but we never know from one day to the next when we will be the one giving and when we will be the one receiving. We don't know. We really don't know. And it's very hard for us when we're in that place of strength and giving to understand that when we're helping someone who's in that place of receiving, that they're us, that we're bonded in that, and they're playing a role in that relationship this moment. And also allowing us the humbling opportunity to experience our capacity to give.
Is there a sense that service is a transformative act and part of the ongoing development of spiritual practice?
Absolutely. There's a teaching that says if a person has, let's say, $100 and they're going to give it to people who are in need. Is it better to give $100 at one time, or is it better to give $1 at a time? And the rabbis say it's better to give $1 at a time because you'll experience 100 times the experience of giving, and you'll cultivate your heart in giving. So you cultivate compassion through that act. So yeah, service, I think, is cultivates our heart.
I have a question. My best friend is Orthodox Christian, and her parents are immigrants from Lebanon. And so there's been many discussions since her country was at war with Israel, many debates about politics and religion there, of course. And it tends to pit each other. Like, I'm not as educated about it because their cable is only from the Middle East. They don't watch anything from America whatsoever. They believe nothing we say at all. And so their view is very, very different, and they hear things and know things I don't know and I've never heard of, and we wouldn't as Americans. And sometimes I just don't know what to say to her because she sounds so ignorant, and I love her to death. She is one of the kindest people I know, but her opinion about Israel isn't pretty, and her family, like, it's hard to be around them sometimes because they have these very hateful feelings. And they lost a lot of family a few years ago, and there's no talking to them that they can't generalize about one specific country or one, thing. And I never, know what to say anymore because they've never, they're always like we were in New York. I was with her family in New York, and it's a huge Jewish population. And her aunt is a teacher in Brooklyn and fought New York, the state of New York, to teach Arabic history and social studies in Arabic for the students. And she blames it on the Jews and that she almost got fired. And there's just so many terrible, terrible, hateful things. And to the point where my fiance, he wants nothing to do with them. And it's really, really hard. And since you're a rabbi, I thought it would be perfect if you had any advice for me about trying to get, her to be a little more compassionate about.
If we knew each other's stories, we would be compassionate. It's true. How could we don't know each other's story? We make somebody else's life, especially if we're in pain. It's hard to see the sensitivity and the pain of someone else. If it's your pain or my pain. My pain, I remember going in Bethlehem, meeting with Palestinian people and Israelis to just go to hear the talks, and everybody. This one came from Europe and suffered the Holocaust and has deep wounds and fear that will tremble in them for the rest of their lives and their children's lives.
I have
at the same time, this young Palestinian man says, I was standing next to my friend when he was shot and died. That's pain. That's terrible. So, but when we say my pain is the right pain, I have a right to my pain, and your pain, we get very crazy very quickly and can't hear. And then for political reasons, there's a lot of manipulation of information and misinformation. This is a huge subject you're talking about, and it's, you know, if we're going to look for the bad in each other, we'll find it. If we're going to look for the good, we'll find it. And it's sad to lock into a narrative about another people that just makes them bad, instead of, wow, what do they feel? What do they feel? It's, I wish I had something to, if I had it, I would publish right away and have the Nobel Peace Prize in a couple of weeks, probably. I'm sorry for that. That's painful.
I actually lost a friend because she didn't believe that the Holocaust even happened. She thinks that Jewish people made it up. And her person she worships is the president of Iran, who has publicly came out a few times and said it's all lies. And it was too much for me to swallow because of the hate, and so her and I couldn't talk anymore, unfortunately.
Thank you for all of the questions and comments. And most importantly, thank you, Rabbi Yitzhak. It's great to share. It's great to share this with you, and thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Thanks. And all of you, thank you so much for engaging so beautifully with this conversation today.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I wanted to thank you all for being attentive and engaged with our guest speaker. I appreciated that. But I'm going to shift gears a little bit now and try to look at service and spirituality in a slightly different context. So the topic that I have for now is spirituality and service in a secular world. Try to reconcile this potential balance. And my basic questions are, what are the motivations for service within a spiritual practice or a religious tradition? What role is played by the server? And what role is played by the person being served? So I'm going to try to work with this and use examples from a couple different traditions and hopefully stimulate some conversation about this relationship and what the purpose of service is, and hopefully to look at the people that are being served as really a gift, as really part of our personal transformation and also part of the spiritual practice that's consistent in service. And I have a couple of just really quick little stories I'd like to tell. The use of parable is a tradition across multiple religious traditions. And what a parable is essentially a teaching story, an allegory, a message that tries to teach in this oral tradition, and was one of the key ways that Jesus used in terms of communicating with people during his time. And one of the key parables that is probably one of the most famous in the Christian tradition is the parable of the Good Samaritan. How many of you have heard this story before? Okay, so most of you at least are aware of the Good Samaritan. Basically, the parable of the Good Samaritan is, again, Jesus is asked by a lawyer in the temple a very specific question. He says, "What shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And so, in the true Socratic mode, Jesus answers the question with another question. And he answers the question, and this is written in the book of Luke, and it's actually the only place in the Bible that this particular story is told. Many of the other parables are told in multiple sections of the Bible. And so Jesus answers, well, what is written in the law? Again, Jesus, very much steeped in Judaism and Jewish law and the Old Testament, knows everything about the prophets, knows everything. And so he answers the question with, what does the law say? And the law basically says that you have to serve your God and you have to be a good person. So then Jesus goes beyond this and tells the story of the Samaritan. And the story is that on this very difficult road to Jericho, which was a twisty-turny road, very dangerous, and it was a haven for thieves. So if you went on this particular road to Jericho, you ran the risk of being robbed. And this particular man is going on the road, and he's robbed. All of his possessions are taken. He's stripped naked, and he's beaten and essentially left to die. And so the first person who comes across this particular individual is described as a priest. And the priest, representing the law, passes on the other side, doesn't attend to the individual. Then another person goes by, and this is another person who would be a lawyer or a leader within the community, sees this individual and once again passes on the other side of the road, leaving the man to die. Then the third person who comes by, Jesus describes as a Samaritan. A Samaritan is a person in that particular period of time that was considered to be a marginalized person. Not clean, not consistent with what was desired at the time. And they had all kinds of different problems, and many people would view them as not being your neighbor. You're not a neighbor of a Samaritan because they're, again, unclean. But what the Samaritan does is he sees the man, he immediately goes to him, he gives him dressing, he gives him wine for his thirst, he gives him oil for his pain. He puts the man on his own animal, on the Samaritan's animal, takes him to an inn, helps serve him, clean him, bring him back to health, and pays the innkeeper with his own money. Then he goes beyond and says, I will pay for you to stay here so you can recuperate, and I will come back and check on you, but the important thing is I want to be of service. And so what you have here is you have a story of the individual giving service, and of course the message that Jesus is putting out is that it's blessed to love, it's blessed to serve, and that this is part of what it is required, because he's again answering the story from the scribe. What does it take to get eternal life? It's being a loving of service. Essentially the message that Yitzhak was saying, loving thy neighbor as thyself, but then acting on it in a meaningful way. And then he tells the lawyer, so to gain eternal life, you need to do the same and go out in the world and serve others. So you see that this idea of service becomes the essence of what it means to be a caring, thoughtful, loving person within this particular tradition. that there's a spiritual dimension to service that is the essence of what a person is supposed to do to, quote, inherit eternal life. Now, the second story I have to tell you is one that I learned about when I was in India. And so it's out of the Hindu tradition. And the story is of a king who's building a palace. And this is a king who feels disconnected to his people. And so he masquerades as just a regular person and goes about the workers who are working on building his palace. And so he goes, and this is a very hot day. It's dusty. They're cutting rock. They're moving lots of material. They're just working very, very, very hard. And so he goes to the first man that he sees, and he asks him, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm slaving in the hot sun. I'm breaking rocks. I'm at the edge of my wits. It's very difficult to be here, but that's what I have to do. I break rocks. I'm very unhappy." He goes to the next man, and he says, "Well, what are you doing?" And the man says, "I'm earning a living for my family. I am the responsible breadwinner in this family, and so I am out here doing this because that's my duty. My duty is to care for my family." Goes to the next man and says, "What are you doing?" And the man says, "I'm following the orders of the king. He's told me that I am to build this palace. It's my duty. I'm happy to do that because I respect the king, and that's my responsibility." And then he goes to the fourth person and asks them, "What are you doing here?" "I'm showing my love to my king. He has given me an opportunity to serve him. This is my blessing. This is my opportunity. Building this palace allows me to worship my king and to be elevated in my life." So the nature of this one, of course, is that the parable is about what is the purpose of labor, what is the purpose of service. And the message, of course, that's transmitted through this particular story is that the blessedness of service is when you view it as a gift. That you do it as a gift, that it has the dual benefit of both producing something that's positive, but really the ultimate essence is that it's part of your own spiritual development. That it's what Yitzhak was talking about, this transformation of labor to a higher order, transformational piece, and it's all about the spirit or the state of mind or your predisposition that makes the difference as to whether it's a gift or whether it's labor, duty, or pain and suffering. I wanted to just juxtapose what we think about in terms of service in the Family and Human Services program and how the notion of the transformation, what's in your mind and what's in your heart as you give service, has a lot to do with whether or not you fall into that first or that second category. And one of the ones, when we talk about the kind of work that we do, one of the main characteristics or curriculum items we have is what we call self-care. We want each of you to take good care of yourself, because we know that in some cases there is pain and suffering, and you all sometimes are overwhelmed. There's sometimes an element of burnout, etc. And that the self-care, of course, is crucial from the context of taking care of yourself. And we propose a lot of very self-help activities. We don't tend to move into the spiritual realm with this, but we know that in many cases people bring that to their own self-care plan, a spiritual dimension, but also a healthy diet, good exercise, think good thoughts, and all that kind of stuff is simply an important dimension. But it's the same concept that we're talking about, which is how you bring yourself to the service, what attitude, what spirit, what demeanor, how you're seeing that has a large role to play as to whether or not you lose that focus of service and begin feeling burdened. Compassion fatigue. I've been in the field now for I think it's something like 36 years, and have experienced multiple occasions where I get tired. I'm giving so much, I experience compassion fatigue. And I always ask myself, what's going on here? Why am I not feeling elevated by, this constant pressure and difficulty? And
can you explain more on that compassion fatigue?
Compassion fatigue is when you believe that you're giving and giving and giving and giving and giving and not getting anything back in return. And so you become fatigued by it. And the corollary, of course, is the potential to develop negative attitudes towards the people you serve and toward the service. And that's why when we talk about people leaving the field of either social work or special education or counseling or any of the major human services, one of the main reasons they talk about is the pain and the suffering and the fatigue and the burnout from this.
Is it kind of the same way we hear with people who are in the ministry who say that he's been burned out and he gave up? Is it the same thing? You feel like you've served so much that you feel like you don't have much to give?
Well, Rabbi Yitz implied it, that some days, he has so many things he has to do that he yearns for the simple days of dressing and feeding and bathing people, because it was a simpler way to serve. And part of where I'm going with this is that we have to constantly check ourselves. We have to ask ourselves, what's our motivation? What is our purpose? What is the vision? What value am I bringing to this? It's the same thing that in terms of the Good Samaritan, what is transformational about that relationship, the giving relationship? Aaron?
Just kind of in correlation with burnout, I found just like personally with my own faith that I don't work in human services. I don't necessarily get burnt out on the work, but I get burnt out on my faith. Like, you see all these hardships day after day, and it's just like, where are you? Like,
yeah. Hey, need some help.
So, especially you've been in this for 36 years now, and you are obviously a man of faith. How do you, like, I know, like, my mom tells me, well, you find faith in the little things, but it's like, but there's some big things.
Well, I'm kind of moving in that direction. I actually have a whole slide about that, but I'll kind of give you a little tidbit ahead of time, which is that the service, at a certain point in my life, the service became the the gift. The person I'm working with is giving me a gift to allow me to work with them, so that the relationship is no longer one of I'm doing this for them, but it's they're doing this for me. And that's the transformation, that's the shift that's very difficult to develop. There's an old statement that, give me the ability to serve humanity and not be crushed by the weight of their pain and suffering. And the way you do that, of course, is to believe that the service that you're providing is to benefit you. I mean, not so much just economically. I mean, there's a whole line of writing about the false relationship that exists between the helper and the person being served. And if you talk with many people who are on the receiving end of services, they often have hostile feelings about those people that are serving them, because there's not a genuine appreciation that exists on either side of that equation. So the idea of requiring that relationship to constantly sustain you, that's what burnout does. That's what compassion fatigue is all about, because you're looking at this as, I'm a good person. I'm a helper. And these people aren't appreciating it. They're not thanking me. Whereas the essence of the spiritual element of service, from not just a Christian tradition, but through all the traditions, is the blessing of the service. And so that's how, in my mind, I have figured out how to do this for long periods of time, and still wake up every morning and go, I can't wait to do whatever I'm going to do, whether it's teach or go to the prisons or go to the state hospitals or go to wherever I'm going to go, where I'm working my way through my own personal development through the mechanism of service and looking at that relationship as a gift. This person is allowing me to develop myself. I mean, and think about it for a second. We're all human service people. And you go into an agency for what purpose? To learn. The clients, so to speak, are your teachers. You're not the dominant relationship any longer. You are the student, and your client or your student or whatever it is your teacher. And that's what service learning and FHS is all about. Is that the people that we are supposedly serving are our teachers. And that's the shift, and I'd like to spend a little time having you all think about that too. But I'm going to get to my slide too. But thanks for asking. I just wanted to, I've traveled a lot in the world, and when you're an American in Guatemala or Nicaragua or Mexico or India, Vietnam, any place you go, you see groups of young people, sometimes middle-aged people, all in groups with T-shirts. Like Mission Activity 2010. And, this is a wonderful opportunity for young people to, for people in general to have an opportunity to give back, so to speak. So, several years ago when I was in Guatemala, I got stuck in a place, one of the roads washed out. And I was stuck in this very small little town for about 4 days with a group of young people from Chicago. And, they knew I was a university professor. They were high school students. And, so we began developing a relationship. And of course, I spent a lot of my time asking them, why are you here? what are you doing? And the leaders were always having a much higher minded. We are teaching these young people about the world and how wonderful it is to give and to make a difference and all this kind of stuff. And, made perfect sense to me. But then when I began talking to the kids, I mean, there were one group of young people who said, I'm here to make a difference. This is part of my spiritual faith. I care about this. This is important. I love everything I'm doing, and I'm just happy as a clam to be here. Next group said something to the effect of, I'm here because I know I need to have some service on my resume when I apply for college. And so this is part of my responsibility. And then there was a third group, and this one young man, he and I got very close because we totally disagreed about everything. But he said, I'm here because the juvenile court judge told me if I don't do something positive, I was going to go into juvenile detention. So, which of those groups of people is the closest to gaining the greatest personal, emotional, spiritual benefit from this activity of, in which their case was they were in a village and they were painting some houses for 6 or 7 families and were stuck with me in this little community. What do you think?
I think there's a guy that disagrees with you all the way. Like the person that is there but is not there for himself, but because he was sent, has the greatest chances to learn something really like good out of it because he's experienced what it is to serve without. I don't know. In my personal opinion, that would be actually also the teacher for me because I'm learning from him and why he's doing it and things like that.
I was going to say, I think it's a trick question. Honestly, I think all 3 of them have an immense amount of opportunity.
You think I would ask a trick question?
I do. I really do, because when I am in the least expecting place, I can gain so much because it hits me in my face. And when I go someplace and say, this is what I'm doing this for and this is what I'm learning, I have the motivation and drive behind that, then I learn just as much because I really am putting all myself into that. But then, all the same, then there's that person kind of stuck in the middle that says, well, for college, once again, kind of unexpected, you're in a beautiful place with beautiful people, and you're going to learn from it.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, what I think for me, I don't know if you mentioned if there were a group of people who said, I didn't come here for anything of such like for college, what I came here because of my own heart to give without expectation of getting back from my recommendation to college or job or whatever, but just a heart of giving. Was there a group when you said that?
Well, each one of them is gaining something that's quite different. Each one of them is in one case, the group is fulfilling their desire to have a meaningful impact on the world. Who would disagree with that? Another group, I'm preparing myself and improving myself so I can go on to college. And then the final one is, I'm avoiding going to jail. And so in a way, to identify any one of those as better or worse, when again the motivation is there to serve, and each one of us have a different reason for it. Each one of us have a different motivation for doing what we do, and no one can really say that one is better than the other.
Yeah, one thing that confuses me is that if we are serving people, for example, right? We want to serve people, and then what about if the person who is doing that for college, what if college wasn't asking anything of such? Will that still have motivated that person to go? I think what you're saying is right, that everyone is gaining But at the same time, I'm asking, can people serve if they were not, if the court wasn't going to have that young person, whatever, if this person who's wanting to have a good recommendation to college, if all colleges say, we don't care about, just come and we will wait. Are we going to have more people motivated?
Yeah. I mean, if you think of yourselves and think of all the volunteer activities and your service learning activities and your internships and all the things that you do as you relate to the human service field, you know, there's probably a little bit of each one of those in why we do what we do. Now, I'm going to try to juxtapose that with this next example, which is a group of students that I met on my first trip to India. And they were from a college in Georgia, and they were on a 3-week tour of India. And they happened to be in Pondicherry when I was there, and they heard that I was a university professor, and they were just all bubbly and wanting to talk. And, you know, we were just having this great conversation. And finally I asked them, you know, not all of them at the same time, but what are the things that have most impressed you in India? You know, the first person says, so noisy. So noisy. Another person says, so chaotic. So dirty. So much poverty. The roads are so scary. And, you know, it just went on and on and on. You know, I got sick. You know, my stomach is, you know, I can't eat. Yeah, all these things, it's just so different than home. I can't wait to get home and get a McDonald's hamburger. All this kind of stuff. And so then I gave them the old FHS pep talk, you know, which is, you know, what we teach our students is to pay attention to relationships. To pay attention to what it was that you came here to do, which is to develop relationships with people. And so I don't hear any talk about the smiles on the children's faces or the relationships that you develop just in the incidental, you know, give and take on a given day, or the hi, how are you doings, and the excitement of when they see you. And I think the point of it, of what spiritual tourism has the potential to do, is to have really positive personal relationship development activities, but also the opposite, which is you never meet people, you don't develop relationships. So what are you going to see if you go to Guatemala or Nicaragua or any of them, to go to the Tenderloin? If you don't develop relationships, what do you see there? It's really difficult. Whereas the idea of service is this idea of a relationship. So, in a service learning tradition, the person providing the service is the learner. The recipient of the service is the teacher. So, small group activity. What needs to be done in human services training programs to recognize this relationship and build on it? So let's get together. You can even mix yourselves up a little if you'd like. And let's spend 3 or 4 minutes and then talk about this, again, transformation of our thinking about the relationship as a gift versus a duty. Okay? Please. So, what thoughts did you have in this relationship, potential relationship change? How would we teach that, or how do we teach that in a human services program? Alden.
I think the most important thing is teaching that understanding and ecological model, learning that right off the bat, and understanding every population in the depth that they deserve, and realizing that every single person is an individual and comes from a different place. And that, to me, is going to continue renewing my respect for understanding the client and meeting them where they're at, and realizing that you can't just blanket an entire population. I think training programs get carried away from that area and more into the resources, the tools, the system, how can we best serve them from up here versus getting down to whatever level they need to be at that moment in time.
Good. Sam?
I was going to build off of that too. Something that we talked about is the need for training programs to fundamentally be founded on that sense of, I love the ecological model because of that, because it takes so much of the environment and the context and everything. It makes more sense, I guess. But it really is the foundation of everything we learn in FHS. And the reason that I like that is because then we learn that each person we talk to has their own context, and they have their own things that they are experts in. They have their own things that they have their own system that they're in. And so when we're working with them, clients specifically, we keep that in mind because of the training that we've had that's founded on that theory or that way of thinking. And I feel like if you have a program that's not founded on that, then a lot of what you learn, a lot of those trainings, they're just practical tools that won't be applied in the right ways.
Okay, very good. Thank
And
you.
that you could learn through experience.
Right. Lots.
Anyone else like to weigh in on this? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I correlate it really strongly to the cross-cultural education that we've gotten so in-depth in this major. A big part in wanting to go abroad was applying what I'd learned and really challenging myself and saying, am I this person that I think I am? And I think to me, I see it, I won't speak for anyone else, but for me, I see it in the exact same light that if I can go to another culture that's so different from my own and say, I want to learn from you and not teach you. I want you to help me to grow. I don't, although I may come from more money and more education, I want to learn from you, and I come from this point of view that I'm there to learn, and I think I see that in just, my own community. Like, I'm here to learn from you. Yes, I want to help you if you are my client, of course. But I see it in that same kind of dynamic that if you don't have this insight, like, I'm the helper, I'm I'm the teacher, you're the student, and that's that, it can be really harmful for that student or that client.
Well, what we've come up with is really a secular view of service. A secular view. Ecological model, very secular. Family, school, community, mesosystem, ectosystem, microsystem, all this kind of stuff. Very secular, very theoretical, very empirically based, and it seems to work. Go ahead.
I wanted to argue that point, though, in
Okay.
that I think yes, it's kind of has the secular feel to it, but for me, personally, that means that I also can't see someone outside of their spirituality, because their spirituality is a huge component of that system. And so, yes, it is sort of a secular term, and we'll learn it in a secular classroom and textbooks and all those things, but I don't think it necessarily has to be a secular point of view. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and that's my next stage. So imagine if we took the ecological model. Brilliant. Bronfenbrenner, I mean, it's been the organizing principle for the FHS program since day one. Day one. But imagine now if you go back to the Good Samaritan parable, where the message is to show compassion and love for those we encounter in our everyday activities. We are to love others, regardless of their race or religion, no matter what their need is. The fact is that the need is there, and we have the capacity to share it. And so if you took a spiritually based notion, the Hindu notion, I'm doing this for love, to worship the king, in Jesus' story, it's the idea of loving thy neighbor. We heard it from Yitzhak today, Jewish tradition, loving thy neighbor. And so if we took that kind of tradition, how would that change what it is that we do? Would we be able to take the next step in that transformation process if we truly loved our neighbor and gave, using the tool of the ecological model, how would that change the training of people? I mean, imagine if the first thing on the FHS website is, we are guided by love and the ecological model. I mean, what do you think people would think?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, actually, I was going to say that they're very compatible, then you kind of ended up saying that.
Oh, I did?
Well,
oh, good.
I think so. Rabbi Yitzhak, he said at one point, when he was addressing, I'm sorry, I don't know her name, Lindsay, that if we all knew each other's stories, we would have more compassion for each other. And that's kind of what the ecological model does, is it kind of explains that everybody has their own story.
Yeah.
So
and remember what Dr. Uno said about dropping the story? He was referring to something very different, which was, don't go in with a prejudiced, biased perspective on people. Come in with a realistic ecological model perspective that then looks at each person as an individual. And then the only thing I'm adding to it is this notion of love as the great mechanism of assuring that you do this for somebody without any expectation of return other than your own spiritual, personal development and growth. Jenny.
Well, I'm just thinking, what a fascinating experience as a student to spend all these years studying and learning and trying to build up cultural competency and expertise and blah, 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 blah. And then the whole intention is then come with a client and then drop the story. I mean, what a fascinating juxtaposition, and yet I think that is what makes a good professional, like having a huge tool belt, but then also at any moment, or maybe from the beginning, dropping it and recognizing that ultimately this is the expert here, as you were saying, like, we'll never fully know our client's story, and don't necessarily try to, but just do your best in that moment.
And not contain it arbitrarily or make assumptions about the person because of what you think is in their heart or in their background or in their story or in their family or in their economics. And see, that becomes the difficult part, that as a human service professional in a secular world, that we're asking to do things that tend to be much more comfortable in a more spiritual tradition, this notion of love.
I think after that, what Jenny said is, to me, what I'm trying to understand is, like, yes, you have all this knowledge, and you try to be culturally competent, more spiritual, like religion-wise, cultural-wise, but I feel like that can also play against you, because once you are, you have this client with you, you're limiting the client to tell his story because you already have, like, oh, I'm culturally competent because this is what I learned, so this is how you act. Like, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It's more like it can be limited if you don't drop the story with whoever you're interacting. Mm-hmm. I mean, one sentence cannot ever be 100% cultural or spiritually competent at any point in life.
Or personally.
Personally. Yeah. I think we're always learning. But, that's my point is that it's important to drop the story because we don't want to limit our learning experience from the client that is right in front of us.
In addition, we want to make sure that our relationship development with clients is sustainable. Because if, in fact, you're giving of yourself for this other motivation, which is I want to help people, and you don't get much in return for it, and you expect something in return for is something like at least an appreciation or cooperation or something like that, then that sets in the questioning in your mind of, I'm just not good enough because I'm not able to sustain and maintain these relationships because fundamentally I don't have the ability to connect at this very important level, and so consequently I'm not effective. I mean, the reason people burn out is because they don't think what they're doing is making any difference. It's not helping anybody. Mm-hmm. Remember what Yitz said? Well, I mean, I started my career doing toilet training in an institution in the middle of the night. My job was to go in every single evening and toilet train a group of people in an institution. And, you know, I always said, not maybe in the last 10 years, but for many years I said, you know, have you done your toilet training? You know, have you done the basic piece of actually knowing that you're doing something effective? Dressing someone, feeding something, toileting them, bathing them. It's very practical. And every day you finish what your work is and you know that you've made some difference. Many days in your professional life, you're not going to know if you made a difference or not. And so you have to have this other motivation that's slightly beyond the ecological model. And so I'm kind of looking at the ecological model as having a really strongly, we call it value, whatever, dimension to it, to understand what role the person you're serving is playing in your personal and professional development. I want to just very briefly juxtapose how our service system is based primarily on secular principles. When we look at our no standards, the ethical standards, you know, they're basically, you know, a secular ethical basis of service delivery. This is brand new, absolutely brand new. Up until about 1930, all of the impetus for service was primarily, quote, spiritually based, all around the world. The United States, Europe, all over the world. The foundation was simply people served other people because it was part of their religious or spiritual tradition. And America and Western Europe and other countries in the 30s and you know, began to develop this secular view of service, essentially taking the role, you know, of service from a spiritual perspective into a strictly commodity-based teacher, counselor, social worker, helper, and then all the people who need help. And so that fundamental shift occurred in the 30s, and the reason it happened was primarily for a variety of reasons, but the religious groups in particularly in the United States and Western Europe were incapable of meeting all the needs that were out there. There was too many needs. Think about what was happening in our country and in Europe in the 1930s. What was happening? Worldwide depression, not enough people or resources to go around to meet all the needs. And so whenever that phenomena occurs, then you have the pendulum switch. So we switched from primarily a spiritual, religious-based human service system, which still exists pretty much throughout the world. But in Western Europe and the United States and Australia, we have this distinctly secular view. Government distrust of religion, very, very strong. And so what happens is we see the pendulum swing back and forth. And what I'm sensing that's happening now is the belief that we've come to a certain point in our human services evolution, that there's a desire to add some fairly non-secular elements that some people could call spiritual, some people could call value-based, but it's a step beyond the pretty much nuts and bolts, bureaucratic, agency-driven way of providing services. And it's a result, it's partly a result of the fact that so many human services are not working effectively. So many services that should be making a difference. Look at child welfare. Who would ever look at our child welfare system, our child protection system, and say, that's a dynamic system that's really working effectively, when we see growth rates of child abuse, criminality, prisons. So many of those kinds of services that are primarily secular are now switching and trying to find, again, a more spiritual dimension to it.
I'm curious as to how you would respond. Do you think that any of that pendulum swinging has anything to do with some of the faith-based initiatives that the Bush administration put into place? Or do you see this as more like farther back? Do you know what I'm asking?
I do. My thought is that the faith-based initiative was simply a packaging of what existed already, and then a very conscious encroachment of non-empirically based, non-evidence-based treatment procedures into the system. So it had a natural evolution, because again, so many of our service delivery systems have their roots in a religious or spiritual tradition, but they became secularized with Social Security, Medicaid, etc. And then it was a desire to kind of give that arrangement more legitimacy, force some dramatic changes in how these organizations deliver their services by allowing for non-empirically based services. And so, in a way, it was kind of a backdoor approach to try to get some of these things that organizations had been frustrated with, denying certain kinds of, again, scientifically based principles in favor of more spiritually based things. And so the pendulum, it did swing pretty far, and by the way, it's going to swing back. We're in the middle of it, swinging back to a more empirically based, more research-based approach, of which the FHS program is clearly an evidence-based program. But that swing is going to be back and forth, and I think that whenever religious groups identify their neighbor in a restrictive way, government will step in and require a more expansive view of the neighbor.
Do you mean in terms of services that are?
Yeah, in terms of who is delivered. Because remember, our laws in this country do not allow us to discriminate on any basis. And so consequently, if an organization is taking any government money, they can't discriminate in any way. So that's why the pendulum kind of got a little bit wacky. But I think it will right itself. But the spiritual elements that I'm talking about really are taking that expansive view of our neighbor within a religious tradition, so that we even use those principles to serve all and not be restrictive. Sure. This is really what we're talking about, is the tension. The tension that exists. If religious groups are responsible for delivery of services, what is the role of secular government? And then if government is responsible for delivery of human services, what is the role of religion? And that tension is what I'm referring to is the pendulum swing. There's always going to be tension, but how it rights itself, and I'm feeling that there's certain organizations that are really showing us the direction of how to incorporate both of these into our system.
Could you give an example?
Yes, St. Vincent de Paul. Perfect organization. St. Vincent de Paul is it's clearly, historically religious organization that is affiliated with, very strong religious background, and at the same time has taken the expansive view of our neighbor. I could also use the example of Mother Teresa's programs in India, where she fought against some of the more restrictive strictures of her tradition to be able to serve people that historically were not being served. So again, she basically took the view of everybody in the world is my neighbor. Again, an expansive view. And so that's how I would see it. And see, here's the tension here, is that when we have people who volunteer their time from a value-based, an ethically based, a spiritually based, whatever your tradition is, whatever brings you to the table. For many people, it's ethical. I'm in human services because I believe in this. I believe in making the world a better place. And then other people are doing it from a primarily spiritual value place. I need to do this for my own personal spiritual evolution. You get to the same place at one step in that process. But what both require is this tension to be resolved. And right now the tension is so high because the people who are paying for us to do what we do, the taxpayers, are saying, we don't know if we can put much more money into this. So that we're beginning to see the government incapable of providing enough services. Guess who's going to fill that breach? It's going to be filled by religious groups, spiritual groups, ethical groups, more religious and spiritual. And then if they don't watch out, they'll restrict their definition of neighbor, and then the government will come in. So you have this constant ebb and flow. But without people like ourselves to participate in both worlds, it won't work. Yeah.
That kind of reminds me, like, for example, like, Fruitful Lake County, we work with a lot of, nonprofit organizations, and these nonprofit organizations, they are mostly religion groups. And we try not to affiliate with any religion, but although we have to work closely with all of them, like, we work with, I go and talk to different congregations, and it's funny because sometimes I get into, like, we should read this from, like, for us, like, like in the Bible, I think.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, I wish I can do it, I'm working, but it's that type of relationship that it's, we're working with mostly religion organizations to provide the service for the people that are, that want food. Yeah. But at the same time, we can't not say, we can't really associate with any of them. But it's kind of like, that kind of like.
Yeah, and I think the tension's good. I think having both elements in our system is healthy because it becomes a check and balance on both sides. And obviously we would like much more funding for human services. We would like, as Yitzhak said, we could use more resources for health, education, child welfare, all these kinds of things. But right now there's such a tension about taxes that there will be another phenomena that arises, which is more voluntarism. And we're done.